I was on my way to my daughter's house for our usual Sunday dinner, a simple tradition that had become the highlight of my week. The scent of rain lingered in the Seattle air, and I remember thinking how peaceful everything felt. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from my attorney. "Call me. Urgent. It's about Sophia." My heart skipped a beat. Sophia? My daughter? My legacy? My pride? I pulled over, hands trembling slightly, and made the call. What he told me changed everything. In the span of a single conversation, the ground beneath me shifted. The woman I had spent my life protecting was about to do something I never thought possible. But before we continue, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Trust me, this story isn't just about business, betrayal, or legal warfare. It's about the very heart of family, how fragile it can be, and what happens when ambition collides with legacy. What you're about to hear isn't fiction. It's a storm that started with a message and ended with something none of us could have seen coming. I stared at the dashboard, the glowing screen now dark again, but the echo of Kevin's voice pulsed in my ears. "Sophia has filed a petition to have you declared mentally unfit to lead Martin Nova." The words didn't make sense, not at first. I sat there in the parked car, windshield wipers slicing through a gentle drizzle, trying to anchor myself in the familiar. But nothing felt familiar anymore. My daughter, the same girl who used to wait for me by the front window, clutching a crayon drawing and asking if we could play office, was trying to take everything I'd built. Kevin's tone had been clinical, controlled, but I could hear the urgency beneath it. She's assembled a group of shareholders. They're citing emotional instability, outdated strategies, and grief, David. They're using Elaine's death as the foundation of their argument. I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how long I'd been gripping the steering wheel. 32 years of building Martin Nova. Countless hours, decisions, sleepless nights, all for my family, for Sophia. And now, she was leading a campaign to strip me of it. I drove the rest of the way to her house in Bellevue, not even sure why. Maybe it was denial. Maybe I needed to see her, to believe she hadn't really done this. The streets were wet and quiet, headlights dancing off the pavement. Her porch light was on. I barely made it to the door when it opened. She stood there, wrapped in a cream-colored sweater, smile practiced and flawless. "Dad, right on time," she said, and hugged me. It felt rehearsed. Not cold exactly, but not warm either. Inside, the scent of roasted chicken filled the air. Tyler, her husband, greeted me with a handshake that lingered too long, his eyes darting a bit too much. And then, like a beam of pure light, Emily came bounding in. "Grandpa!" she squealed, holding up a drawing of us at the office. My heart clenched. She didn't know. Of course she didn't. I picked her up and kissed her forehead, grateful for something real in a house that suddenly felt like a stage. Sophia watched us, something unreadable, flickering in her eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or calculation. I couldn't tell. We sat down for dinner, the table perfectly set, the conversation carefully curated. Sophia asked about my health, my sleep, if I was eating well. Every word a reconnaissance mission dressed as concern. I tried to ask about the finance department lightly, casually, but she brushed it off. "Let's not talk shop at dinner, Dad," she said, as if she hadn't just declared war on me in a courthouse filing. I stared at her as she passed the chicken. Same precise movements I'd seen in boardrooms. Same smile, same tone. It was all so perfectly constructed. I almost admired it. But admiration has no place when you're being hunted. As Emily asked me about the story of the first computer we built in the garage, I looked at Sophia. She was slicing chicken with surgical precision. This was no misunderstanding. This was strategy. And I wasn't just a father anymore, I was her obstacle. After dinner, as I stood to leave, she walked me to the door. "Dad," she said softly, "are you okay? You seem different tonight." I looked at her face, those familiar features wearing unfamiliar expressions. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, just reflecting on how much Martin Nova means to our family. Her eyes hardened just a little. She nodded. "Drive safe." I stepped into the cool night air and closed the door behind me. From the sidewalk, I could see her moving through the kitchen window, efficient, controlled, methodical, planning my removal. That night, I parked overlooking Lake Union, the city lights flickering like old memories across the water. My phone buzzed again. "Kevin, how was dinner?" he asked. "Like watching a performance," I said. "She knows how to sound concerned while putting a knife in your back." And that was when I realized this wasn't just a disagreement. This was a coup. And my daughter, my own flesh and blood, was orchestrating it with military precision. The rain tapped lightly on the windshield, a steady rhythm that mirrored the storm building behind my eyes. Kevin's voice came through the phone, calm but sharp. "She's been preparing this for over half a year, David. Detailed reports, meeting transcripts, even comments you made during the Anderson acquisition. She's presenting them as signs of declining judgment." I leaned back in my seat, staring at the blurred cityscape beyond the glass. "That meeting? I raised my voice because they lowballed us on valuation. That wasn't irrational, it was protecting our interests." "I know that," Kevin replied, "but she's reframing it. Says your anger jeopardized the deal, and she has board members who are willing to testify." I closed my eyes. Images flooded in long hours spent perfecting pitch decks, late-night emails to keep deals afloat, weekends sacrificed, all for Martinova, all for her. "She's using everything, Kevin, even my grief." "Yes," he said softly. "There's a line in the filing about delayed trauma response after Elaine's passing. Suggests emotional deterioration. She's making the case for early cognitive decline." I almost laughed, but the sound stuck in my throat. I'd never felt sharper, more focused until now, until this betrayal. If she wins the hearing, temporary conservatorship over the company, psychological evaluations. You'd be removed pending review. And if I refuse? She's gathered enough shareholder support to call for a vote. You could be ousted, David. I started the engine and let the city swallow me, driving aimlessly through the wet streets of Seattle. Buildings loomed like indifferent spectators as I passed landmarks that had once meant something, the coffee shop where Elaine and I had mapped out the company's first 5 years, the old co-working space where Sophia used to color while I drafted investor memos. I ended up back at the house, a stone-faced craftsman on Capitol Hill that Elaine had loved more than any office tower. I went upstairs to my study and opened the safe. Inside were the letters Elaine had written in her final months, beautiful, painful reminders of what I'd missed. "She doesn't feel seen, David," one letter read. "She thinks the company matters more than she does." I'd dismissed that at the time. Sophia was thriving, running departments, making strategic moves. But now I wondered if she'd mistaken my pride for absence. I flipped through an old manila folder marked Sophia Personal, report cards, photos from company events, snapshots of her next to me at ribbon cuttings and tech expos. There had been a time when she looked at me like I held the world. Somewhere along the line, that awe had curdled into resentment. My computer chimed. An encrypted email from Kevin. I opened it, and there it was, the formal complaint. 49 pages of cool surgical character assassination. Subject exhibits increased emotional volatility. Maintains attachment to legacy strategies. Evidence consistent with cognitive rigidity and depressive patterns following spousal loss. They were using Elaine's death as a port, scalpel cutting me away from my life's work with sympathy disguised as concern. I poured 2 fingers of scotch and kept reading. Expert witness lists, internal memos, snippets of meetings taken out of context. Each line meant to undermine, to erode, to redefine me as someone incapable. But what stung most was the brilliance of it. It was calculated, thorough, and at least on the surface, believable. She had learned well. At 1 a.m, I finally shut the laptop. The house around me was dark, hollow. Elaine's portrait sat on the bookshelf behind me, watching silently. She had tried to warn me. "She needs your presence, David, not your provisions." But I had believed that building something would be enough. I had been wrong. I pulled out a notebook and began scribbling names, potential allies, loyal board members, friends in legal and finance, medical experts who knew me well enough to speak truth. If Sophia wanted a war, I'd give her one. But she'd made one critical mistake. She thought I'd go quietly. She'd underestimated the man who taught her how to fight. By the time the sky over Seattle began to shift from ink to slate, I was dressed and in the elevator, briefcase in hand, descending into a day that would mark the beginning of something far from routine. I wasn't going into the office to lead. I was going to prepare for war. 3 floors down from mine, in the same building, was Steve Wilson's corner office. 60 years old, co-founder of Martin Nova, my friend for 4 decades, and the only person besides Kevin who knew the full scope of what was happening. His assistant waved me through before I could announce myself. "He's expecting you, Mr. Martin." Steve looked up from a stack of financial reports, reading glasses perched low on his nose. "David," he said, standing, "We need to talk," I cut in, placing the briefcase on his conference table with a deliberate thud. "Close the door." Something in my voice made him obey without a word. When the lock clicked, I flipped open the briefcase and laid out the contents like war maps. Legal filings, shareholder tallies, email printouts. "She filed the petition 2 weeks ago," I said. "She wants temporary control of the company while I undergo psychological evaluation." Steve blinked hard, his mind catching up. "Sophia? Who else?" I pointed to the list of shareholders. "Corbin's with her, so is Wheeler. She's promising them a 15% dividend bump." 15? Steve scoffed. "Based on what?" "Staff cuts, automation, AI-driven restructuring." His face paled. "That would gut our operations." "It would destroy everything we've built," I said. "But to shareholders chasing a trend, it sounds like gold." Steve pulled out his laptop, logged in, and started pulling internal data emails, forecasts, project memos. "I've been watching her pitch them, David." She tailored each offer. Corbin got earnings projections. Wheeler got a study on operational efficiency. She knows what they want to hear. "She's selling them a fantasy," I said bitterly, "and a profitable one at that." On his screen, he opened one of the decks Sophia had shared, polished, flashy, and dangerously optimistic. It promised 25% growth in 18 months through strategic restructuring, a euphemism that meant layoffs and cultural annihilation. "This isn't innovation," I muttered. "It's corporate vandalism. Try telling that to investors addicted to velocity," Steve replied. "What's our actual growth?" "Steady," I said. 11.7% last quarter. Retention rate is 95%. Customer satisfaction is in the top percentile. I pulled another folder from the briefcase and spread it open. And look, companies that chased what Sophia's selling: TechFlow Industries, Renexa, Algorithm IQ, all imploded within 5 years. Steve leaned over the files. "Remember when TechFlow tripled its stock price after firing 60% of their support staff? And then their user base collapsed," I said. "Exactly. We worked side by side for an hour, mapping out a battlefield of metrics, alliances, and vulnerabilities. By the end, the conference table looked like the inside of a war room. One more thing," Steve said quietly. "Her lawyer, Laura Blake." I felt something tighten in my chest. "I know, Kevin filled me in. 42 cases, 38 wins. Specializes in family corporate disputes. Turns courtrooms into theater." "Then we write a better script," I said. Steve's calendar chimed. "Quarterly board meeting next Tuesday. She'll make her move there." "Unless we move first," I replied, already mentally sketching a counterattack. "I want a private lunch with Corbin this week, somewhere neutral. Let's remind him what happens to investors who gamble against long-term leadership." Steve nodded. "Morton's, Thursday." Perfect. The storm had arrived, but I wasn't standing in the rain anymore. I was stepping into it, shoulders square, briefcase in hand, ready. She thought I'd crumble. She forgot who taught her to win. The next morning, I walked into Kevin's law office 10 minutes early, my briefcase heavier than usual, not from weight but from consequence. The receptionist offered coffee, but I barely acknowledged her. Kevin emerged from his office, tie slightly loosened, eyes sharper than ever. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded. "Let's go to war." His conference room had been transformed since our last meeting. On one wall were neatly pinned pages from Sophia's legal filing, 49 in total. On the opposite side, our growing arsenal: medical records, financial reports, internal memos, employee testimonials, and in between them a wide, blank whiteboard waiting for strategy. "Show me everything," I said. Kevin handed me the latest document, Sophia's formal complaint. I flipped through it quickly, skimming phrases that had become familiar by now. Increased emotional volatility. Resistance to innovation. signs consistent with early-stage cognitive rigidity. Each sentence landed like a slap. "She's not just trying to take the company," I muttered. "She's trying to rewrite who I am." "She's building a narrative," Kevin said. "And Blake's job is to sell it." I stopped on one page, an annotated timeline of my recent decisions. The Anderson acquisition, the Employee Wellness Fund, the charitable partnership with the Elaine Martin Foundation. They're calling this sentiment over strategy? Yes. They argue that while these moves may seem altruistic, they don't align with profit, maximizing behavior expected of a CEO. "That's nonsense," I snapped. "We've seen returns on all three of those initiatives." "We know that, but to the court, we'll need to prove it." Kevin tapped the whiteboard with a marker, "which is why we've begun assembling witnesses. Patricia in accounting, Daniel in engineering, loyal, respected, and credible. Their testimonials are airtight. They'll speak to your leadership, your clarity, your strategic consistency. And the doctors? 3 cognitive assessments scheduled. Independent specialists, blood work, psychological evaluations, full-spectrum tests, every angle covered." I sat down, rubbing my temples. "This is overkill." "It has to be," Kevin said. "Blake will come after everything: your sleep patterns, your reaction times, your tone of voice during earnings calls. She's been known to turn mild grief into clinical diagnosis." I looked at the screen on his laptop. A photo of Blake, mid-40s, stylish, confident, and terrifying. She was smiling, but not kindly. "She's a predator," I said, "and she smells blood." "Then we give her a different scent," Kevin replied. He walked over to our side of the wall and began posting the next phase of our plan, a countersuit. "Grounds?" I asked. "Breach of fiduciary duty. Conspiracy to defraud shareholders. And," he paused, looking at me carefully, "intentional infliction of emotional distress." I blinked. "That's personal." "Because it is personal. She's using your wife's death against you. She's manipulated internal records, misled investors, and launched a coordinated campaign to destroy your name, and she thinks the courtroom will be her stage. Then let's give her a spotlight she's not ready for." Kevin smiled for the first time in days. That's what I wanted to hear. He handed me the countersuit, 26 pages of precise, damning accusations written in cool corporate legalese. I signed it without hesitation. My hands didn't shake. "Not anymore." "When do we file?" "This afternoon. Blake will receive it by 5. He glanced at the window. "And David?" "Yes?" "There's one more thing. Hearing's been scheduled the 12th of March. I nodded slowly. 3 weeks. 3 weeks to gather, refine, and strike. Just then the door opened and Steve entered, briefcase in hand, eyes hard with purpose. "Gentlemen," he said, "ready to save the company?" The 3 of us stood shoulder to shoulder, looking at the walls lined with betrayal and truth. I took a deep breath, turned to Kevin, and said, "Let's teach my daughter the rules of the game I invented." Outside, Seattle was draped in fog, the skyline fading into gray. But inside this room, clarity was forming. And clarity is a dangerous thing, especially when held by the man everyone thought was finished. I arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a table by the window at a quiet cafe just off the market, the kind with real wood chairs and a view of Seattle's restless rhythm. Outside, the street was alive with vendors and passing commuters, but inside it was still like the breath before an argument or the moment before the tide turns. I ordered black coffee, no cream, no sugar. Something about its bitterness felt right. This meeting wasn't about reconciliation, it was reconnaissance. At exactly 2:15 she arrived. Sophia, in her slate gray suit, her hair tied back in a way that projected control, competence, distance. She scanned the room like a general taking stock of a battlefield before sitting across from me. Her face was calm, but her eyes flickered, searching for an emotional advantage. "Dad," she said evenly, "thanks for coming. Your message said it was important." I kept my voice neutral, not cold. Controlled. She nodded, folded her hands on the table like she was already on the stand. "How's Emily?" I asked. "She's fine. She's been asking about you." The words stung more than they should have, asking about me as though I were some distant uncle, not her grandfather. And Tyler? He's buried in a new project. You know how he is. She offered a hint of a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We were dancing around the perimeter, avoiding the crater in the middle of the floor. But I'd never been one to waste time with pleasantries. Why didn't you come to me directly? I asked. Her eyes faltered for half a second. Just enough. About what? She replied, feigning ignorance. I didn't flinch. About your concerns, about the company, about your future, about mine. She sat back slightly, her breath catching before she spoke. Because when I tried, you were always busy, always in meetings, always too deep in forecasts, or restructuring, or just not there. I studied her, and for the first time, I didn't see a hostile witness or a cunning strategist. I saw a daughter, wounded and hardened by years of waiting for her father to look up. Sophia, I said quietly, I built Martinova for you. No, she replied, her voice suddenly sharp, clear. You built it for yourself. I was just the inheritance, the brand extension. The words hit hard, harder than any legal accusation. She leaned forward, her tone pressing. Do you remember missing my college graduation? Because of a supplier meeting in Boston? I nodded slowly. And my first board presentation you didn't call for a week. I was launching the Malaysia office, I said, though even as the words left my mouth, they felt hollow. You missed birthdays, holidays, family vacations. You made promises and canceled them on airport tarmacs. I was building security for us, I whispered. You were building a monument to yourself. She paused, looked out the window, then back. I wanted your attention, not just your approval. I wanted to matter to you beyond the quarterly report. I stared at the surface of my coffee. Your mother tried to tell me. She did, Sophia said, and you brushed her off, said legacy takes sacrifice. But the only one who didn't sacrifice was you. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was honest. Sharp-edged truth hanging in the air between two people who'd run out of ways to avoid it. She reached into her bag and pulled out a tablet. Let me show you something. Graphs. Projections. Industry comparisons. Dad, Martinova's losing ground. We're lagging behind our competitors in digital transformation, in automation, in cost efficiency. Because I've chosen to protect our people, I said. Because I believe loyalty still has value. Loyalty doesn't pay dividends, she snapped. And this isn't about protecting employees, it's about refusing to adapt. You're clinging to a world that doesn't exist anymore. And you're burning down the one that still works, I said. You want to replace people with systems, culture with efficiency. That's not leadership, Sophia. That's eradication. It's evolution. It's evisceration, her expression tightened. Business isn't personal, Dad. Then why does this feel so personal? That caught her. She looked away again toward the window, where a child was laughing as he chased bubbles down the sidewalk. Her voice softened. Because it is. Because I needed to prove something. To me, to myself, that I wasn't just your legacy, that I could win, that I could lead. I felt something deep in my chest. Shift not anger, not sorrow, but recognition. You didn't have to fight me to lead, I said. You just had to ask. I didn't think you'd ever let go. I leaned forward. You were right. Our eyes locked. And in that look, I saw the battlefield between us slowly transforming not into peace, but into possibility. So what happens now? She asked. I sipped my coffee, letting the silence stretch for just a moment longer. Now, I said, now we see if we can build something stronger than what we broke. The courthouse steps were slick with last night's rain, the kind of rain that lingers into morning just enough to make everything feel heavier. I adjusted my tie as I climbed each one slowly, deliberately, the weight of the moment pressing against my chest. Ahead of me, Sophia's legal team was already assembling 3 suits, clustered around one woman who stood absolutely still at the center. Laura Blake. Sleek navy suit, leather portfolio, eyes that scanned like searchlights. Sophia stood just to her right, wearing dark blue, no jewelry, hair down. Controlled. Measured. The optics were perfect daughter, concerned about an aging father, a benevolent protector, not a hostile usurper. She didn't look at me. Didn't have to. The performance had already begun. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with the sterile energy of corporate interest masquerading as justice. Shareholders in tailored suits. A couple of reporters scribbling early notes. The gallery was half full, but every person in it had something to gain or lose from what was about to happen. Kevin sat beside me, his hands calm, notes stacked with military precision. "Just remember," he said, not looking up. "Answer simply. Stay composed. Don't let Blake bait you. You're not defending yourself. You're demonstrating stability." I nodded once. The judge, Marion Keller, 60s, silver hair, no-nonsense reputation, entered and called the room to order. The case title echoed against the high ceilings. Martin v. Zero, Martin Nova Technologies Incorporated. That single sentence carried 32 years of labor, of dinners missed, of flights rerouted, of whispered apologies at bedtime. And now, it would be dissected publicly. Blake rose like a politician, gliding across the courtroom floor. "Your Honor," she began, "this is not a case of bitterness or rebellion. This is a case of responsibility, of safeguarding a company's future." Her tone was syruped steel. "We are here today because Mr. Martin, while once a visionary, has become emotionally volatile, strategically inflexible, and cognitively impaired by unresolved grief." Her eyes flicked toward me, then away calculated disrespect. "We will present evidence of erratic decisions, outdated methodologies, and an inability to adjust to modern market demands. This is not a personal attack. This is corporate stewardship." She turned, gestured to Sophia. "My client, Miss Sophia Martin, seeks temporary guardianship over Martin Nova, not out of ambition, but out of necessity." Then Sophia took the stand. I watched my daughter swear an oath to speak the truth, and then begin to construct a version of reality where I was no longer the man who had built anything. "My father has always been driven," she said. "But in the past 2 years, since my mother passed, his decision-making has become emotional." She recounted meetings I barely remembered. During the Anderson negotiations, he shouted at the table. He rejected a fair offer based on instinct, not data. She talked about the Elaine Martin Foundation, how we'd committed over $180,000 annually. I questioned the ROI, and he became defensive, unreasonably so. I clenched my jaw, fists resting quietly under the table. My grief wasn't irrational. It was human. Sophia's voice never cracked. "He refuses to consider automation or AI implementation. Our competitors are gaining ground while we protect outdated systems. Retention is high, yes, but innovation is low. We're stable but stagnant. Martin Nova is falling behind." Blake let the silence settle before continuing. "And in your professional opinion, what does the company need?" Sophia didn't hesitate. "Leadership focused on performance over sentiment. On the future, not the past." Kevin's cross-examination was elegant, like carving marble with a scalpel. "Miss Martin," he began, "what was Martin Nova's profit margin last quarter?" 12%, she said. "And the quarter before?" 11.6. "So under your father's supposedly impaired leadership, the company is still growing?" "Short-term gains don't guarantee long-term success." "How about employee retention?" 94%. "Industry average?" She hesitated. 67. "So Martin Nova keeps more employees, maintains consistent growth, and you're saying this is failure?" Sophia's jaw tightened. "I'm saying it's not enough. Or perhaps," Kevin said coolly, "your standards are impossibly high because you're measuring more than just business metrics. You're measuring your father." "Objection," Blake snapped. "Withdrawn," Kevin said smoothly, but the damage was done. The morning dragged through witness statements. James Corbin, once neutral, now visibly nervous. "I believed in her plan," he admitted, "but maybe I underestimated the risk." When the court recessed for lunch, Sophia walked past me with her shoulders squared. She didn't look at me, but I saw her exhale just barely. She wasn't winning. She was surviving. Back in Kevin's office that evening, I was reviewing testimony when Sarah, my executive assistant, stepped in. She carried a folder marked Employee Communications. Confidential. Her face was pale. "You need to see this," she said. I opened the folder. Internal memos, meeting transcripts, private email threads. Sophia had been promising department heads 20–30% salary increases and phantom stock options, none of it sustainable. Kevin skimmed the documents and froze. This is actionable, he said. It's material misrepresentation, maybe fraud. A moment later, Steve arrived with more. She's shopping the same narrative to new investors, pension funds, private equity groups, painting you as the bottleneck to exponential growth, telling them automation will save enough to fund all those raises. But it won't, I said. Not even close. Exactly. And then Kevin's phone buzzed. He read the text silently, then looked up. We've got something else, he said. Her lawyer, Blake? Bar Association has a sealed file. Prior suspension for coaching a client's testimony. Subornation of perjury. My pulse quickened. How strong is it? Strong enough to file a complaint, he said. And to rattle her. Combine it with this. He tapped the employee emails. And we don't just have a defense, David. We have a reckoning. I sat back slowly, processing it all. My daughter had waged a campaign of deception, miscalculated ambition, and desperation. She'd taken my silence for weakness. But silence isn't surrender. And in that moment, with the city lights flickering to life outside Kevin's office window, I knew exactly what the next courtroom session would be. Not just a rebuttal, but an unveiling. The real story was about to begin. The courtroom felt different the second time around. The air was tighter, heavier, the silence humming with tension. The same people filled the benches, shareholders, reporters, curious attorneys, but their expressions had changed. No longer just interested. Now they were alert, waiting for something. They sensed it, the shift in momentum. Sophia sat to the left, flanked by her legal team. Blake was hunched over notes, lips pressed thin, no longer radiating control but calculation. The predator had picked up the scent of something unexpected. Sophia still wore composure like a tailored suit, but I noticed her hands clenched just a second too long after adjusting her hair, her eyes darting toward the gallery as if searching for reassurance. She didn't find it. Judge Keller entered, gavel-tapping once. Mr. Tran, she said, eyes narrowed. You indicated additional evidence would be presented today. Kevin stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked with deliberate calm to the center of the room. Yes, Your Honor. With the court's permission, we'd like to submit newly uncovered financial records, as well as recordings relevant to the credibility of opposing counsel. Blake was already rising. Objection, this material was not submitted during discovery. Because it was discovered last Friday, Kevin said smoothly, without turning. Your Honor, the defense only now learned of multiple unauthorized financial transfers made by the plaintiff. Judge Keller lifted a hand, silencing them both. Let's hear it. Kevin approached the projector and tapped his tablet. The screen lit up with bank statements clean, sharp, time-stamped. 3 transfers, he said, totaling $793,000, moved from Martin Nova corporate accounts into shell entities used to finance Miss Martin's legal campaign. No board approval. No CFO oversight. He pointed to the screen. And if that isn't sufficient, we've traced the funds to third-party consultants hired to secure shareholder votes under false pretenses. I looked toward Sophia. Her face had gone pale. The room was dead silent. Kevin's voice didn't waver. This is not strategy. It's misappropriation. It's financial misconduct. It's fraud. Blake sprang to her feet. Your Honor, these claims are desperate. Mathematics isn't desperate, Kevin said, still calm. Mathematics is precise. The judge motioned for him to continue. And there's more regarding counsel's conduct. He pulled up a new file. We obtained security footage from the Martin Nova executive conference room. During off hours, Miss Blake was recorded coaching her client, Miss Martin, on how to frame her testimony. The courtroom buzzed as the screen flickered to life. Muffled but clear, Laura's voice rang out. Avoid terms like emotional or loyalty. Say performance. Results. Stay calm judges like calm daughters, more than emotional ones. Objection, Blake barked. That was a privileged conversation. On company property, after hours. Recorded during a routine security sweep, Kevin said. Your Honor, we will also be submitting a complaint to the State Bar. Judge Keller's eyes narrowed. Submit the files. I'll review them personally. Then she turned, finally, to me. "Mr. Martin, please take the stand." As I stood, my heart was steady, not defiant, not angry, just ready. Kevin began, his tone formal. "Mr. Martin, how long have you served as CEO of Martin Nova Technologies?" 32 years, I replied. "I founded the company in 1992 with $40,000 borrowed against my home." "And what is the current valuation of the company?" "Roughly $310 million, I said, with annual net profit averaging $28 million over the last 3 years. "Have you been declared mentally unfit by any medical professional?" "Number, I've undergone 3 separate evaluations, all clear. Cognitive, emotional, and psychological assessments confirm I am fully capable of managing the company." Kevin displayed the report, signed, dated, sealed. "What is your leadership philosophy?" "Balance," I said. "People and profit, legacy and innovation, sustainability, not just scale." He paused. "And in your opinion, why is your daughter pursuing this action?" I looked toward Sophia. She still wouldn't meet my gaze. "Because I failed to show her that she mattered more than the company. And now she's trying to prove she's stronger than me. I respect her ambition. I regret the pain that led to it. But that doesn't make her actions legal or right." Blake's cross-examination was rushed, defensive. She tried to paint me as stubborn, backward-looking, too sentimental. "Isn't it true you resisted implementing AI into your logistics division?" "I resisted firing 30 employees for a marginal gain in efficiency," I answered. "That's not fear of technology. That's loyalty to people who helped build this company. You approved a partnership with a nonprofit that brought no measurable ROI. It brought trust, goodwill, and community credibility. Not all value shows up on a quarterly sheet." By the time we adjourned, the energy in the courtroom had shifted. Reporters were scribbling faster. Shareholders were whispering. Blake avoided eye contact altogether. Sophia gathered her things slowly, as if the weight of her strategy had finally caught up with her. She didn't look triumphant. She looked tired. Judge Keller's voice rang out one last time. "We will reconvene in 5 days for a final ruling. This court is adjourned." As the gavel came down, Sophia turned toward me. For just a breath, she was my daughter. Again, not the executive, not the adversary. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered. I looked at her, really looked at her, and replied softly, "But it did." Then she walked away, shoulders heavy, future uncertain. And I stood there in the silence, knowing the verdict was coming, but the real damage had already been done. The days leading to the final hearing passed in a quiet that felt more like tension than peace. I spent them in the office, behind the same glass walls I had stood within for over 3 decades, but everything looked different now. Familiar furniture, muted light, and the hum of servers and conversations, it all felt like echoes from another life. My team moved around me cautiously, with the kind of respect that bordered on reverence, or maybe fear, not of me, but of what this war had revealed. The building wasn't just made of steel and concrete anymore. It had become a battlefield, and everyone knew it. On the morning of the verdict, the sky was a shade of silver. Only Seattle seemed capable of producing washed out but watchful, like the day itself was holding its breath. I arrived at the courthouse early, greeted Kevin with a nod, and sat silently as the room began to fill. The shareholders were here again, lined up like a jury with too much at stake. A few of them glanced my way and offered polite, uncertain smiles. No one wanted to be on the wrong side of a story still being written. Sophia entered quietly, no entourage this time. Just Tyler beside her, his hand on the small of her back, steady but distant. She looked smaller than I remembered, as if the armor she'd worn throughout the hearings had grown heavy enough to shrink her beneath its weight. When our eyes met, I saw no challenge there, no victory, just fatigue. The kind of fatigue that comes from carrying too much guilt for too long. Judge Keller appeared promptly at 9, her gavel echoing once across the polished wood and marble. "This court has reviewed the final materials presented, including financial evidence, recorded communications, and character testimony," she said without preamble. Her voice was steady, firm, and final. "In the matter of Martin versus Martin Nova Technologies, the court finds no grounds to declare Mr. David Martin legally or mentally unfit to continue serving as Chief Executive Officer." There was no cheer, No outburst, just the quiet release of 100 collective breaths. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I simply closed my eyes for a beat. Vindication doesn't always come with fanfare. Judge Keller continued, and now her tone sharpened. However, the court is gravely concerned by the plaintiff's unauthorized use of corporate funds and the documented coordination between legal counsel and client to influence testimony. These matters may fall under the jurisdiction of the State Bar and corporate fraud investigation units. Therefore, this case is dismissed with prejudice, and control of Martin Nova remains in the hands of Mr. Pression. Martin, all motions by the plaintiff are denied. Blake didn't move. She sat stiffly, eyes down, her career unraveling quietly beneath the gaze of 100 witnesses. Sophia bowed her head, and in that moment, the war was over. Afterward, in the hallway, Kevin shook my hand. "It's done," he said. "You won." But it didn't feel like a win. It felt like survival. And survival comes with casualties. Steve approached with a smile that faded as soon as he saw my face. "The company's safe," he said gently. "So is your name." I nodded. "But what about her?" Steve didn't answer. He didn't need to. Sophia stood off to the side, arms folded, staring at nothing. Tyler murmured something to her and stepped away to give us space. I walked toward her slowly, unsure what to say after everything we'd both done. But I didn't have to say anything. She spoke first. "I was wrong," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Not about the need to evolve, but about the way I went about it. I studied her face, Elaine's eyes, my jawline, and something entirely her own. "You weren't wrong to want more," I said. "You were wrong to believe you had to burn everything down to get it." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "I wanted to be seen," she said, "and I thought the only way you'd look at me was if I threatened what you loved most." I swallowed hard. "You were what I loved most. I just didn't know how to show it without a business plan." She gave a sad little laugh, the first real emotion I'd seen from her in weeks. "So now what?" she asked. "You run the company. I fade into the news cycle?" I looked past her, through the windows, at the gray horizon stretching over the city we both called home. "No," I said. "Now we figure out if two people who nearly destroyed each other can build something better together." She blinked. "Together?" "Shared leadership," I said. "Equal stake. You bring innovation. I bring experience. You fight for tomorrow. I defend what got us here." Her lip trembled. "You'd trust me after everything?" "Because of everything," I said. "Because now you know exactly what's at stake, and so do I." She didn't answer immediately. She just stepped forward and hugged me. It was clumsy at first, stiff and unsure, but it softened. We both softened. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a CEO trying to hold on to a legacy. I felt like a father trying to reclaim his daughter. Not through power, not through strategy, but through something far riskier grace. The board would have questions. The shareholders would whisper. But none of that mattered, not yet. What mattered was that Sophia and I had both stood in front of the fire. And somehow, we'd stepped through it. Not the same, but maybe stronger, maybe ready to build something that could finally live up to both our names. 10 days later, I arrived early at Lake Union, the place Elaine always called our city's quiet heart. The sun hung low in the sky, bouncing soft gold off the water, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to stillness. Not peace. Peace takes time, but stillness, at least. I sat on our usual bench, the one with the slightly uneven plank, and the view that stretched wide enough to feel like possibility. This wasn't a business meeting. There were no documents, no lawyers, just two people trying to find a thread of something worth holding on to. Sophia arrived at 3:15, exactly as she said she would. No suit today, just jeans and a soft gray sweater. Her hair was down, no makeup, no posture to protect. She looked like my daughter again. Older, weathered, but somehow lighter. She sat beside me in silence, her hands folded in her lap, and for a moment we just watched the sailboats drift across the water like they had nowhere else to be. "I've been thinking about what you said in court," she said quietly. "About building something stronger. Together." I nodded slowly, letting the words sit in the space between us. She turned to face me. I've also been thinking about what I never said to you. Not clearly, anyway. Her voice caught, but she kept going. I never felt like you were proud of me. Not really. Not for who I was, just for what I did. I closed my eyes. That truth landed harder than any deposition. I was proud, I said, my voice hoarse. Every step, but I thought showing it meant creating more opportunity, more structure. I thought giving you the company would be enough. She shook her head gently. I didn't need an empire. I needed a father. I looked out at the water, remembering Elaine's letters, her warnings. She needs your presence, not your legacy. Sophia's eyes brimmed. I spent so much of my life trying to earn your approval. Then, when I thought I had it, I wanted more control, validation, recognition. I confused leadership with revenge. And I confused ambition with love, I said softly. I thought everything I built would say what I never did. But buildings and balance sheets don't say I'm proud of you. A long silence followed. The breeze off the lake carried the scent of wet pine and something faintly floral, spring creeping in. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. So where do we go from here? I took a breath. You still want to modernize Martinova? She nodded. I do, but not with fire, with care, with purpose. Then you've got my trust, I said. Let's rebuild it together. Your future, my foundation. CEOs. Shared power, shared voice. She turned toward me slowly, her expression unreadable. After everything I did, you'd still offer me that? Not in spite of what you did, I said. Because of what we both survived. Because we know now what we nearly lost. Her hand found mine hesitant, then firm. Then let's do it right this time, she said. For Mom, for Emily, for us. I smiled. No boardroom talk at Sunday dinners. She laughed. No shareholder strategies during bedtime stories. Deal, I said. And for the first time since Elaine passed, I didn't feel like I was running a company. I felt like I was coming home. To something real. To something we could build not from ambition or duty, but from understanding. From grace. From family. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and garlic. Elaine's favorite recipe simmering on the stove, resurrected from memory by Sophia's careful hands. It was a quiet kind of celebration, no streamers, no speeches, just warmth, and a table set with purpose. The candles flickered gently, the good china was out, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like anyone was pretending. I stepped through the doorway carrying a modestly wrapped package and a bottle of wine older than her marriage. Something smells like your mother's cooking, I said, hanging my coat. Sophia turned, cheeks flushed from the heat. Same recipe, same love. I smiled, and for once, it wasn't guarded. Emily came running in from the living room wearing a blue dress speckled with watercolor stains. "Grandpa!" she squealed, barreling into my arms. I scooped her up, breathing in the scent of paint, crayons, and childhood. "I brought you something," I said, handing her the package. She tore into it, like it was Christmas morning. Inside, a miniature navy blazer with gold buttons and a tiny nameplate stitched inside Emily Martin, future CEO. Her eyes lit up. "Is this for when I'm the boss?" "Someday," I said, "when you're ready." Sophia smiled from the stove, and this time it reached her eyes. Tyler emerged with a stack of blueprints under one arm and a bottle of sparkling cider under the other. "Children's Museum," he explained, gesturing to the rolled drawings. "Downtown expansion. I figured tonight was worth celebrating." "It is," I said. "Not just the company. Us." We sat down to dinner, the kind that fills a room not with noise, but with presence. Emily chattered about preschool and her latest art project. Tyler talked about playful architecture. Sophia shared her rollout plan for the company's modernization. Cautious, thoughtful, inclusive. "We're integrating automation," she said, "but not erasing people. We're expanding remotely but protecting our culture." "The best of both worlds," I said. Finally, after dessert, Sophia produced a slim manila folder. Inside, the partnership agreement. Clean, elegant, balanced shared authority, dispute protocols, clear language for two strong minds with a history of clashing. We signed without hesitation. Emily watched, wide-eyed. "Are you not sad anymore, Grandpa?" I looked at her, then at Sophia, then back again. No, sweetheart, Grandpa's happy. Mommy and Grandpa are friends again. Because we're family again, Sophia added softly. We clinked glasses, wine, cider, and juice. Then Tyler raised his. To Elaine, he said. She would have loved seeing this. To Elaine, we echoed. In that moment, with candlelight dancing against the walls and Emily wearing her little blazer like a crown, I felt something I hadn't in years. Not triumph, not success. Belonging. And when Sophia looked across the table at me, with her mother's eyes and her own hard-won grace, I knew we hadn't just saved a company. We'd saved a future worth sharing. Together. Monday morning came softly, without ceremony. The rain had passed during the night, leaving behind clean sidewalks, bright glass, and a sense of quiet promise. I pulled into the Martinova parking garage just after 7:45, the same time I'd arrived nearly every morning for 32 years. But this time felt different. This time, I wasn't walking into a corner office alone. I was walking into a partnership, a beginning. Sophia arrived a few minutes later, her steps slower than usual, but no less sure. She wore a navy pantsuit, not armor this time, just presence. The lobby team greeted us with curious smiles. No one asked questions, but I could feel the temperature of the company shifting. Not anxiety. Something else. Curiosity, maybe. Hope. We rode the elevator to the top floor in silence, but not the awkward kind. It was the kind of silence that lives between two people who've fought, broken, and rebuilt side by side. When the doors opened, our executive team was waiting. Steve, Patricia, Daniel, a few newer faces I didn't know as well. They were all standing, not in protest or confusion, but in quiet anticipation. I stepped forward, clearing my throat. This morning, I said, you're not just seeing a structural shift. You're witnessing a commitment to unity, to change, to legacy. I glanced at Sophia, who nodded and stepped in. As of today, she said, David and I will serve as co-CEOs. Not divided, but aligned. Innovation with wisdom. Speed with stability. One voice, two perspectives. There was a beat of silence. Then Steve stepped forward. So who do we report to? He asked, his usual dry tone softened by a grin. I smiled. You report to the mission, I said. To the work, to both of us, Sophia added. And if we ever disagree, we'll do the adult thing. We'll argue behind closed doors and emerge with one plan. Laughter rippled through the room, relieved, warm, a sound I hadn't heard around here in a long time. We got to work. Meetings filled the day, but they felt different, less like checklists and more like conversations. Sophia led the rollout of our digital audit initiative, explaining how automation would complement, not replace our people. I spoke about continuity, reinforcing our commitments to employee development and community partnerships. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and that made all the difference. By late afternoon, I returned to my office, our office now. On my desk sat a drawing, crayon on cardstock, a stick figure version of me and Sophia, side by side behind two desks. Above it in purple marker were the words, Best Team in Seattle, Love, Emily. I sat down, tracing the edges of the paper with my thumb, and for a moment everything stilled. The lawsuits, the depositions, the years of missed dinners and fractured conversations, they didn't disappear, but they didn't define us anymore. We had turned our war into a foundation, our failure into a framework, our wounds into understanding. Sophia knocked gently on the doorframe. Ready for the weekly wrap-up? She asked. I held up the drawing. Already got my report card, I said. She smiled and walked in, sitting across from me like she'd always belonged there. And maybe she had. Maybe this was what it was always leading to. Not a legacy passed down, but a future built together. A new chapter, co-written in ink and resilience, under the shared roof of something neither of us had to conquer to call our own. That Friday evening, the Martin House in Bellevue glowed with the kind of warmth that no boardroom could ever replicate. The dining room table was set again, this time with a deliberate sense of celebration candles, polished silver, and a bottle of champagne Tyler had been saving for years. The week had been grueling long meetings, late-night calls, adjustments to a new rhythm, but tonight wasn't about numbers or strategies. Tonight was about family. Sophia moved easily between stove and counter, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, laughter bubbling more freely than I had heard in years. Tyler set out glasses, humming to himself, and Emily skipped into the room carrying a stack of her drawings, insisting they needed to be part of the decorations. She taped them to the walls with the determination of a curator, proud of every crooked line and stick figure. One showed me and Sophia at desks side by side, both smiling, with the words, "Work together," scrawled across the top in orange marker. Another was of Elaine, holding Emily's hand. My throat tightened at that one. When dinner was served, conversation flowed as naturally as the wine. Tyler spoke about his children's museum project downtown. Sophia outlined her phased plan for gradual modernization, carefully explaining how it would preserve culture while introducing new efficiencies. I listened, chiming in where needed, but mostly letting her voice fill the space. She was no longer trying to prove herself. She was simply leading. And this time, I was beside her, not in her way. After dessert, Sophia brought out a slim leather folder. Inside was the final version of our co-CEO agreement, freshly printed, elegant in its clarity. Equal authority, equal accountability, guardrails for disputes, a commitment to transparency and to family time. We signed it at the table, with Emily watching like it was the most important ceremony in the world. "Does this mean no more fighting?" she asked. Sophia and I exchanged a look, then nodded together. "No more fighting," I said. "Just building." Glasses were raised once more, and Tyler's voice carried across the table. "To new beginnings," Sophia added. "To family." Emily lifted her juice and declared with all the gravity a 4-year-old could muster, "To not being sad anymore." We laughed, the kind of laughter that heals as much as it celebrates. As the candles burned low and the evening drew quiet, I looked around the table, the family I'd nearly lost, the company I'd nearly surrendered, the future I'd nearly overlooked. Everything we had fought for, everything we had risked, was here in this room, bound not by contracts or court rulings, but by something older and stronger. Legacy, I realized, wasn't about control or inheritance. It was about partnership, about passing on not just what you've built, but the space for someone else to build beside you. And as I clinked my glass gently against Sophia's, I knew, for the first time in years, we weren't just surviving. We were beginning, together. The weeks that followed settled into something I hadn't felt in decades, a rhythm that wasn't dictated by crisis or conquest, but by balance. Monday mornings began with Sophia and me side by side, reviewing weekly reports not as adversaries but as partners. She brought a sharpness, a willingness to challenge, and I brought steadiness, context, and memory. Meetings that once ended in tense silences now closed with solutions. The staff noticed it. You could see it in the way the halls hummed again, in the way conversations carried less hesitation. People weren't whispering about courtroom drama anymore. They were talking about projects, about opportunities, about the future. One Thursday evening, I stayed later than usual. The city outside glowed with its restless neon heartbeat, but inside the building there was a calm that felt new. I walked past the engineering floor and saw Daniel leaning over a workstation, animatedly explaining something to 2 younger developers. They were smiling, energized. Upstairs, Patricia had a group of accountants laughing over a spreadsheet error that had once been a source of stress but now was just a human mistake. And in Sophia's office, the door was cracked open, her desk a storm of sticky notes and coffee mugs. She was on the phone, her voice steady, convincing a skeptical vendor with the kind of authority I used to pride myself on. Watching her, I realized I wasn't just seeing my daughter. I was seeing a leader who had carved her own place, who didn't need to steal power to prove she could hold it. That weekend, we gathered again for dinner, no champagne this time, no formality, just the simple comfort of routine. Tyler set out a platter of grilled salmon, Sophia fussed over roasted vegetables, and Emily insisted on stirring the mashed potatoes with a wooden spoon twice her size. At one point she climbed onto my lap with a stack of drawings, proudly showing me the newest one, a skyscraper with the words Martinova written in purple crayon across the top. At the base were 3 stick figures holding hands. "That's you, Mommy and me," she said, pointing. "We built it together." My throat caught. Out of the mouths of children, The truth always arrived, stripped of complication. Later, after Emily had gone to bed, Sophia and I lingered at the table. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the dishwasher. She poured herself a cup of tea, then looked at me. "Do you think Mom would be proud?" The question hung heavy. I thought of Elaine, her patience, her sharp eyes, her letters written in looping script when she knew time was short. "Yes," I said finally. "She'd be proud of you, of us, for finally listening." Sophia nodded, blinking away what might have been tears. I wish she could see this. I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. She does. Every time we choose family over pride, she sees it. As I drove home that night through streets shimmering with rain, I realized something had shifted inside me. Winning in court had saved my company, but these quiet nights were saving something much greater: my family. The legacy I'd always chased wasn't a tower of glass or a balance sheet inked in black. It was this: the sound of my daughter's laugh in her own kitchen, the weight of my granddaughter in my arms, the fragile, powerful peace of knowing we had chosen to build instead of destroy. And for the first time in years, the future didn't feel like something I had to defend. It felt like something we could embrace, together. Summer came early that year, as if the city itself was eager for renewal. The days stretched longer, the air warmer, and Seattle shimmered under skies that felt unusually generous. At Martin Nova, the shift was palpable. The tension that had once hung over every meeting had evaporated, replaced by an energy I hadn't seen in years. Teams collaborated with ease. Ideas that once stalled in politics now moved forward with surprising speed. And at the center of it all stood Sophia and me, not as rivals, but as partners. On Monday mornings, we walked into the building together. People noticed, not because of the optics, but because it felt real. Father and daughter, two leaders finally aligned. During meetings, she challenged me openly, and I welcomed it. Where I saw risk, she saw possibility. Where she pushed for change, I reminded her of the people behind the numbers. And for the first time, our disagreements became a strength instead of a fracture. At home, the change was just as profound. Friday dinners became sacred: phones off, laptops closed, no business talk allowed. Emily insisted on a new ritual, each of us sharing one thing we were grateful for before dessert. Some weeks it was small, her new crayons, Tyler's finished project. Other weeks it was bigger. One evening, Sophia looked across the table at me and simply said, "I'm grateful for second chances." I couldn't speak for a moment. I just raised my glass. One Saturday afternoon, Emily brought me another drawing. This time, it was of a tall building, bright with windows, and above it the words, "Family Tower." 3 stick figures stood outside, hand in hand, smiling under a wide sun. "That's our company," she said proudly, "but it's also our home." I held the picture carefully, as if it were made of glass. Out of everything I'd built, this, the laughter of a child, the steady bond of a daughter restored, was the only legacy that mattered. As I watched the lake glimmer under the late summer light, I realized something simple and profound. Survival had given us a future, but forgiveness had given us a life. And for the first time, I wasn't just proud of what we had built. I was proud of who we had become, together. Thank you for staying with me through this story. A story not just about business or legacy, but about family, forgiveness, and the courage to begin again. If it resonated with you, if you found yourself reflecting on your own relationships, your ambitions, or even the battles you've fought and survived, then I want to invite you to stay connected with us. By subscribing to this channel, you're not just following another story, you're joining a community that values resilience, growth, and the lessons hidden inside life's hardest moments. Each week, we bring you narratives that blend drama and truth, stories that challenge you to think differently about success, about family, about what really matters when everything else is stripped away. So, if you haven't already, click that subscribe button below. It only takes a second, but it makes all the difference. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter. We've got more stories coming that you won't want to miss. And if you enjoyed this one, please let us know in the comments. What part spoke to you the most? What would you have done differently if this were your family, your company, your choice? Your voice is what makes this conversation meaningful. So subscribe, share your thoughts, and be part of something larger than just a story. Because sometimes the most powerful lessons come not from victories or defeats, but from what we choose to build together.